welcome to the House of ZK Radio, which is a focused podcast and media channel exploring everything ZK, zero knowledge. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alice. I am host of House of ZK Radio. I'm joined here today with Jon, who is the co-founder and CEO of Veridise. Very excited to have you on the podcast today here, Jon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering if we can first start off with your origin story. So what led you to join the Web3 spaces and specifically focused on the security side? And also very curious to hear the origin story on Veridise's side as well. So what led you to found a company that focused specifically within blockchain security?
Yeah, so basically at a high level, Veridise was kind of spun out of some work that my advisor and I were doing during my PhD. I'd been in the security space for a while, working on a number of different things, particularly like malware analysis and stuff like that. And then Ishla and I had a project that involved blockchain. So she had a previous student who built a tool, and then we used that tool to build this other thing called Smart Pulse, which would formally verify temporal properties in smart contracts. And so that was kind of how I got introduced to Web3 is, by looking at it as, kind of an interesting application or an interesting domain for some of the tools that we were developing, because smart contracts had some useful properties to make verification more scalable. And so after that, or after we created the project, then there was interest from like some other security companies as well as VCs and like using our tools to help with audits. And we noticed that in the space, there were some companies that we're already using tools in order to help with auditing, like Certora and runtime verification, but many of the auditors in the space weren't. And there was a very low diversity in the tools that were available to use for security reasons.
Got it. Yeah. And in terms of the diversity in the tooling, I also noticed that for Veridise's focus, your specialty areas are also quite diverse. Like you do ZK audits, smart contract audits, also within the DeFi space and L1s and L2s. Mm-hmm. So it's a very very wide variety of focuses that you have.
Yeah. It is quite wide and pretty challenging at times, but because the particular area of computer science that we come from is this area called formal methods, which is about, reasoning about the semantics of a programming language in order to discover information about it. It has been like we've been able to, very quickly apply, knowledge from one domain to another domain and use that to efficiently, identify bugs manually. But also we've been using audits as a learning opportunity to see where there was a deficiency in tooling and, make sure that we can fill the gap over time. And so that's what we've been particularly focused on doing with ZK recently.
Mm-hmm. I see. And on the topic of tooling and your focus on filling that gap, I'm wondering if you can speak more about the motivation behind the Veridise team developing its own in-house tools. So from my knowledge, you have quite a few Vanguard, OrCa, as well as Picus as well. Mm-hmm. So wondering if you can shed some light into how those kinds of tools compare to, say, some others that are focused within static analysis, within automated testing, other ZK auditing tools. Wondering if kind of the main motivation behind Veridise developing and also using its own in-house tools.
Mm-hmm. So the main motivation for developing the tools is essentially to make it, easier for us to use or to make use of those tools during our audits. So for example, you mentioned Vanguard, which is a static analyzer, and there is another open source static analyzer called Slither. One thing that we noticed when using Slither, though, is it produced a lot of false positives, and in some cases, it was also producing, or it seemed like it was producing false negatives. And so we thought it would be useful to, because we've worked on static analysis quite a bit, to develop our own infrastructure so that we can make sure that we were conservatively reasoning about individual programs to make sure that anything we reported, or we wouldn't report any false negatives, and that we could reuse the infrastructure across multiple different languages. So, for example, Slither is only or can only analyze Solidity, but with Vanguard, we have used that in order to analyze Solidity, and we reuse the framework itself in order to build ZK Vanguard, which we use to analyze ZK circuits. And so the goal was to generate, these kind of internal frameworks that had the flexibility for us to apply them to different domains as well. And so with OrCa, which is a fuzzer, again, there are other fuzzers out there like the Foundry fuzzer or Medusa, which are available for Solidity, but in other ecosystems, there are fewer fuzzers. So, the goal of developing something like OrCa was one, to improve the usability of some of these fuzzers, because they can be a little bit difficult to use if you're trying to find certain types of bugs like reentrancies, but also to make them more broadly applicable so we can kind of like plug and play with different VMs. And then with the ZK tools, when we started working on them, there was nothing at the time. Most of the literature or the academic literature about ZK tooling has been published by us. There's been, some work by others, but we've published, I think, 4 papers so far related to ZK tooling. And so, that's been a gap that we've been focusing on a lot recently, because there's a lot of important properties that you want to hold in a ZK circuit, and it's very important that they do hold. And we've noticed that they are a common cause of bugs. So, for example, like under constrained circuits or determinism issues in ZK is a very common bug. We created a formal verifier for it. And so recently we've been working a lot on making sure we can scale that formal verification so it works on something like a ZKVM.
Got it. And I really like how you mentioned that your approach is really the plug and play. So you have that flexibility in your framework so they can apply to other areas. I think that's very, very applicable. And on the topic of just the ZK tooling and just the audits in general, how do ZK audits compare to some of the other kinds of security audits that you do at Veridise? Is there a different type of approach or different type of process that you go through, or some specific key questions that you ask when you're going through an audit for a ZK project?
Yeah. So with a typical DeFi project, you can actually trust the code that you're looking at in front of you. You actually know that it's going to perform that computation. So you know very explicitly what's going to happen. With ZK, depending on the part of the code that you're looking at, you don't have these guarantees. So for example, a lot of developers make this mistake where a ZK circuit is kind of separated out into 2 components. The witness generator, which simply just generates the input to the ZK component, which is the constraints, right? And so a lot of developers make this mistake where they, define their witness generator beautifully. It does, whatever they expect. However, they don't do a good job of validating that computation, their constraints, to make sure that it would only accept the computation from that witness generator. And so, that's kind of the interesting thing about auditing ZK is you have to figure out which part of the code you can actually trust, which in this case is the constraints. And then also you have to link that back to this other component, which is the witness generator, to make sure they're doing the same thing. And so it is definitely different. It requires, kind of a similar skill set, but also it requires a person to pay a lot more attention to what's going on, to reason about things a lot more explicitly, because constraints have this very restricted form. And so it's not like you can map 1-to-1, oh, this is doing A divided by B, and, this is doing A divided by B over there. Instead, the way the code is actually going to look is going to appear different. And so you kind of have to, do that mapping internally. And that's part of the reason why we make such, explicit use out of tools, is because it's easy to miss things.
I see. Yeah. And, you mentioned that a lot of the common bugs when it comes to ZK is down to the circuit level. And there are some common mistakes that you see developers making, especially on the witness generation portion. I'm also curious to hear if there are any other kinds of um, areas of a ZK application where a typical audit focuses on in addition to the circuit level. I'm wondering if you guys also look at any sort of bugs, say within the proving system or within any other aspects of the stack. Yeah, just curious about the general process and the approach that you take.
Yeah, of course. Um, you know, really, it depends on the client. Just because we are an auditing company, the scope of work depends on what the client wants audited and what they're willing to pay for. And so, one thing that we've seen is oftentimes the proving system is kind of provided as a public good. Like there's not really one person who explicitly owns it, and so pretty frequently the thing that's in scope of our audits is just like this person's ZK circuit. So we have to assume that the proving system is correct and that, everything has been implemented correctly and it's great. And so normally what we do have in scope is the ZK circuit itself. There are some clients who have approached us about auditing cryptographic primitives, like, things that are being added into a proving system where they actually want us to evaluate the cryptography, and we do that as well, but that is far less frequent.
Got it. I see. And also on the topic of some of the common security vulnerabilities or common bugs that you see, you mentioned before about developers and the witness generation portion, but also wondering if there are any kinds of other vulnerabilities that you've seen come across quite frequently when you're doing these audits for ZK-related applications. Are there any kind of consistent patterns or trends that you see? And do you have any sort of advice for any developers in the audience who are developing these ZK applications and looking to just build more secure code in general?
Yeah, so by far the most common bug that we find is under constrained circuits. So in different languages, they can, look different. And so, for example, in CIRCOM, this typically occurs if you're using this very explicit operator, which has, basically looks like an arrow with one stem rather than two. But in other languages like Gnark, it's because of someone using hints or something like that. And so the thing that's the most important is ensuring that everything that you're doing is properly constrained. And that's not necessarily something that's easy to do. And so when it comes to checking to make sure your ZK circuit is correct, like testing is a big thing, but also consider performing like some, minor metamorphic testing around, certain parts of your circuit where something might be under constraint. So for example, rather than using your witness generator, try mutating a witness in order to see whether your circuit is under constraint, have negative tests, that sort of thing, in order to have, kind of more assurances before the audit that everything is correct. The other vulnerability that we found, fairly frequently in these ZK audits is privacy leaks. And so there are a lot of people who are using ZK for scalability, but not everyone is, especially in some of the ecosystems that try to, allow people to write privacy preserving applications like Mina, Alio, Noir, / Aztec. And so in those cases, the important thing is making sure that, where your private data is flowing. Essentially, you have an idea of, how your private data can be accessed, but also kind of reasoning about what someone might be able to learn from the data that you're making public about your private data. And so this is something that can be difficult because you might be able to expose certain private data over time. It might not just be an all at once thing. And so just having an idea and mapping out exactly what someone can learn about your private data then becomes important.
Got it. Yeah. And I like how you mentioned about the privacy portion as well. I think for a lot of people, when they just think of ZK, they just think of it as, a single use case. But depending on, say, if ZK is being used for scalability purposes versus privacy purposes, then the approach for building the application itself is going to be much different. And I'd imagine you'd find different sorts of bugs there as well. So appreciate you for mentioning that. And then also on the vulnerability side, I'm wondering if it's possible for any kinds of secure primitives that are being included in some sort of application, is it possible for any kinds of vulnerabilities to be introduced as part of the larger protocol? Like if it's configured in a more insecure manner within the larger protocol. Yeah, wondering if that's possible. And in that case, how can developers ensure that the end-to-end security of their protocol is ensured?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of things that can go wrong there. So for example, let's go back to privacy really quick. Someone might have designed this really great privacy circuit, but then they realize that, they don't necessarily have sufficient performance to be able to run it locally. And so in that case, they might want to use something like a proving network. And so this is a bit of a straw man, but when you end up trying to use a proving network, you have to provide all of the inputs to that particular network. And so then the trust of that network, or you have to essentially trust that network, and it kind of introduces a broader degree of trust. And so you can go with a centralized proving network if you wanted to, but then you're trusting that that individual is not going to leak your secrets somehow. And so that is where, even if you're using ZK, there are these other design decisions that you might have made in your global architectural design of your application that, could leak secrets. Other areas that we are likely to see at some point is in more common Web 2 traditional security work, there's a lot of work about, extracting secrets from local devices. And so if this becomes bigger, then people are going to have to worry more, explicitly about the security of the device as a whole, and ensuring that a particular secret can't be extracted locally. And so, for example, we're already seeing cases where hackers will target devices in order to extract private keys. But if ZK on devices become bigger, then there might be more interesting attacks where they try to, extract secrets as well.
I see. So it really depends on the kind of design considerations that project made and, how that affects the overall architecture.
Yeah, definitely.
I see. And I also wanted to ask you a bit about any kinds of new security vulnerabilities that may come up when adding these types of abstraction layers on top of, say, we traditionally handwrote a lot of circuits, but now there's more and more projects who are making their own ZK DSLs, and then adding further abstraction layers on top. Even we're now seeing a lot of ZKVMs. I'm wondering, in adding these kind of new abstraction layers, do you see any trends with new kinds of security vulnerabilities or new kinds of bugs being introduced? Or does it make it so that maybe there are, say, more on the ZKVM side, perhaps there are more bugs on the compiler side rather than on the circuit side? Just wondering if you have seen any sorts of new trends that have arisen with this whole idea of adding these new abstraction layers on top of our traditional approaches for just building circuits directly.
Yeah, definitely. So what I would say there is, from the developer's perspective, it can reduce the number of security considerations that you have, because let's just take the ZKVM as an application. When you're building on top of the ZKVM, you're kind of gaining some of the guarantees from the ZKVM implementation itself. So you are no longer writing a circuit, you are providing a program that is deterministic, and the ZKVM is responsible for executing that using their ZK circuit. And so you no longer need to actually worry about whether or not your computation is under constrained, or whether your computation is correct per se, because the ZKVM itself is responsible for executing, let's take like RISC-0 or SB1, the RISC-V instruction sets. And so in that case, you are borrowing security guarantees from another person. And so yes, that does in some ways make things easier, but it also can increase your circle of trust. And so it's important that when you're deciding what to build off of, that you understand the type of security work that they've gone through, the guarantees that they basically provide, because they are now part of your security. And so if someone can break the ZKVM, they can likely break your application. And so you yourself have less to worry about when making the code, but also more to worry about because now the ZKVM is part of your circle of trust.
Got it. I see. So there's that kind of trade-off that needs to be considered, because developers, well, they no longer have to go through the burden of writing these circuits by themselves. They can instead just write programs they're in languages they're more familiar with, but at the same time, they have to consider any types of security guarantees that may be borrowed from the overall system. Okay.
Right, and ensure that they're comfortable with the work that was performed by whoever is providing that infrastructure, that they did a reasonable job ensuring those guarantees are upheld.
Got it. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious to hear about your general predictions for this. So with the emergence of these alternative methods, as opposed to writing these circuits directly, do you foresee these approaches becoming more and more common, especially since, at least on the developer's experience side, it may be a lot easier? Or do you see maybe like a combination of both the practice of writing these circuits directly, and then also, say, using these higher level abstractions? I'm just wondering about your predictions for this.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of nuance. So I think that ZKVMs have done a great job of improving the developer experience. Now, someone can simply go and have access to all of the Rust crates, or crates in their favorite programming language that have already been used over and over, and they can inherit common infrastructure that they don't have to write themselves. And that's a great thing, because the infrastructure is then battle tested. They don't have to worry quite as much about whether they introduce bugs, but that does come with some risks, which we can basically supply chain risks. And so that is a great thing, and it helps a lot with developing complex applications and also with prototyping. And so I think that a lot of people are going to take advantage of that. There are some types of applications, though, that people might not find are suitable for a ZKVM. So, for example, if a team has enough time and enough expertise to write their own ZK circuit, it will be more performant than a ZKVM, because you're no longer, it's kind of like the difference between compiling and interpreting. So they're not working with an interpreter anymore. They are directly compiling their circuit, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so that can provide, performance gains, and, that could be good. The other consideration is with ZKVMs, right now, you can definitely write a ZKVM that incorporates privacy, but depending on the size of the application that does so, it can be a little bit difficult to get privacy in a ZKVM. This is because many people right now are excited about using ZKVMs in proving networks because they can be very performant and stuff like that. But when you're using a ZKVM with a proving network, you have to provide all of the public inputs, all of the inputs to your executable, and those might be private. And that is a consideration that you need to make, because then you need to figure out whether or not you trust the proving network, and if you don't trust the proving network, how you can perform some client-side proving to decouple the privacy from the scalable execution. That's not always an easy problem.
Got it. Yeah. So there are some considerations to think about from both sides. As you mentioned, for circuits, they can be more performant. You don't have to deal with the overhead that comes with the ZKVMs, and perhaps privacy-related applications are more suitable. But with ZKVMs, and there's a lot of projects who are first starting out, and like the idea of being able to bootstrap it very quickly,
Oh, yeah.
and having that kind of developer, like of ease and developer experience, developer adoption. So yeah, as you said, there's kinds of pros and cons for both sides.
Yep.
I see. Okay. And also just wanted to hear about some of your general thoughts for the ZK space itself. There's been a lot of just talks about the ZK being the end game. Curious to hear about your thoughts on if you see ZK becoming kind of the dominant cryptographic tool for privacy or for scalability in the future, or do you see maybe a combination of multiple different cryptographic primitives coming into play? MPC, FHE, the use of trusted execution environments are becoming more popular topic of conversation. So wondering about your thoughts on just how you see the general landscape of ZK playing out.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I think that ZK will likely be an important primitive. It provides you a lot. It's currently becoming more and more performant. But, there have been more conversations, like you said, about like MPC, FHE, and so on, where particularly with some of those primitives like FHE, I don't think that they've had quite the same performance gains as ZK, which is why ZK gets, kind of a stronger endorsement from the community, let's say. But, privacy is kind of going to be essential for these blockchain systems because I think, I'm not unique in saying this at all, but, in order for someone to use a blockchain, I think that they are going to want to have some sort of privacy guarantee because if my address gets exposed, then someone gets to see everything that I did. The whole world can see everything that I did. And, that is a privacy concern. And I don't think that very many people, like, even if they're just buying coffee every day, necessarily feels comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just as a last question before we close, I'm wondering if you have any announcements that you'd like to make to our audience or any kinds of last closing thoughts or advice that you'd like to give to any developers and the engineers in the audience who are currently developing ZK applications or looking to maybe any sort of advice for avoiding these common bugs and security vulnerabilities that you see.
Yeah, ZK applications are great, and we really enjoy looking at ZK applications because they're always super interesting. But, even with ZKVMs, it can be hard to design a good ZKVM application. And so even if you're, writing regular Rust with a ZKVM, it can be important, or it is important that you still get a security audit because we've been auditing a lot of ZKVM applications recently, and, they still have fairly common bugs in them. So I don't think that there's really any ZKVM application that we've audited before or so far that we haven't found at least one bug in. And so it's still important that you get audits. But the other thing that I would say is tools are also very important. At Veridise, we've put a lot of work into building security tools in order to ensure that your project is actually secure. And we use these tools during the course of our audits because they help. They mean that, it's less likely that something is going to be missed during a manual review and so on. And so, particularly if you're developing, infrastructure that's going to be reused by others like ZKVMs, it's really important that you think a lot about security and then come to companies with like us about, the tools that we're developing. Like at Veridise, you mentioned Picus, which is a formal verifier that we have to actually verify whether or not a given ZK circuit is deterministic. And we recently have been working with RISC-0 in order to formally verify the determinism of their ZKVM. And we're very close to fully formally verifying the determinism of RISC-0 because we've spent a lot of work making sure we can scale formal verification for this one specific property, which is very important to ZK circuits.
And it's really great to hear from the perspective of someone doing audits. I think there's a lot of people in the space who are so excited about innovating about building, but they also need to consider, like, take a pause and consider those kinds of potential security vulnerabilities that may come up, which is, really important for any kind of application to consider. So really appreciate all of the insights that you brought here today, Jon. And hope you can join us again sometime soon.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
All right, yeah, thank you so much.